At my age, you don't expect your own son to lock the door from the outside and leave as if no one is still inside the house. On the first day, I told myself he was just running late. I turned the handle several times. Then I pressed my crutch against the door and knocked. The sound stayed in the room, hit the walls, and came back to me. I went to the window. Wooden boards had been nailed across it from the outside. I ran my fingers along the edges, hoping to find even the smallest gap. There was nothing. Our house stood far from town. The neighbors were so far away that even in winter you could barely see smoke from their chimneys. If I screamed, no one would hear me. I understood that when I called out as loudly as I could and heard nothing but my own breathing. For 3 days I tried to open the door. Sometimes I pushed the handle with all my strength. Sometimes I struck the lower part of the door with my crutch. By the end of the 3rd day, my palms were burning and my fingers were swollen. I slid down to the floor and leaned my back against the wall. My knee hurt, but the silence hurt more. Sorry, I really want to pause my story for just a moment and ask you right now, from which city or from which country are you listening to my story? Please write it in the comments. I will read your replies with great warmth and from the heart. None of this started in a single day. At first, he took my pension card. He said, "You don't need to go to the bank. I'll handle everything." Then he began locking the door when he left the house, saying it was for my safety. I walked with a crutch, and that argument sounded reasonable. Slowly, I got used to the money going through his hands, to my leaving the house depending on his schedule. But the day he moved me into the small back room and said, "Stay here for a while," there was no care left in his voice. When the door closed, I clearly heard the key turn. That sound felt cold inside my chest. I stayed awake the first night. I took small sips of water and divided the pieces of bread so they would last longer. I kept telling myself he would come back in the morning. The second day passed. I didn't hear a single step outside. By the 3rd day, I no longer had the strength to keep hitting the door. That was the first time I allowed myself to think that maybe no one even remembered I was still in there. By the end of the 3rd day, I had lost my sense of time. I didn't have a clock. He had taken my phone. Only thin lines of daylight slipped through the cracks between the boards on the window. I knew it was night when the room went completely dark and I could no longer make out the walls. That day, I stopped hitting the door. I didn't have the strength anymore. I moved slowly across the floor so I wouldn't strain my knee. I was almost out of water. My head hurt, but what troubled me most was not knowing where he was. Every time the silence stretched on, I tried to convince myself that maybe something had happened to him. Maybe he'd been in an accident. Maybe he needed help himself. That thought carried me through the first 2 days. A mother thinks about her child before she thinks about herself. But by the end of the 3rd day, that thought began to change. If something had truly happened to him, someone would have known. The police would have come. A neighbor. Someone would have knocked on the door. No one came. That was when I looked at the room differently, as if there had to be a way out inside it. The door was old. The lower part of the frame looked slightly weakened. When I pressed my hand against it, the wood didn't feel as solid as it should have. An old metal hanger lay in the corner. I picked it up and slowly straightened it. My hands were shaking. I knew I couldn't open the lock. It was secured from the outside. So I started working on the lower part of the frame. At first, carefully, then harder. After each strike, I paused to catch my breath before continuing. The wood began to give way little by little. A small crack appeared. I slid my finger into it and felt the frame crumbling from the inside. With the last of my strength, I drove my crutch into the same spot. The frame split. The door didn't swing fully open, but it loosened enough for me to press my shoulder against it and push. The door opened. The first thing I felt was the air. Cold, but clean. For the first time in 3 days, I saw the yard again. In that moment, I understood if something had truly happened to him, now I would be the one to find out. And if nothing had happened, then I would have to answer to myself. When I opened the door and stepped into the yard, I held onto the broken frame for a few seconds so I wouldn't fall. My leg was shaking. The yard looked the same as always. Dry grass, the old fence, the gravel driveway. Nothing showed that I had been locked in that room for 3 days. His truck wasn't there. I walked to the front door and tried the handle. It was locked. I had to break a window to get into my own house. I swung my crutch and struck the glass. On the second hit, it shattered. I carefully cleared the broken pieces and climbed inside. The house was heavy with silence. The kitchen sink was full of dishes. Empty beer bottles were lined up on the table. The air smelled stale. It was the kind of house where someone lived, but no one cared. I couldn't find my phone. I searched through drawers, went into the bedroom. Nowhere. That's when I understood he had taken it with him. I found my purse on the top shelf of the closet. My wallet was inside. The card was gone. I was still trying to convince myself that maybe something had happened to him. So on my way, I stopped at the small store he often went to. The cashier told me she had seen him there the day before with his friends. She said it casually, even smiled, said he seemed to be in a good mood. yesterday. I had been locked in that room for 3 days. Yesterday, he was standing there. In that moment, everything settled into place. Nothing had happened to him. No one was looking for him. No one was worried. During those 3 days, I had been worried about his life. I kept thinking maybe he was hurt somewhere. A mother thinks about her child before herself. He was drinking. I didn't go to the police. I didn't go to a neighbor. The next morning, I went to the bank and blocked the card. I spoke calmly, as if it were just a financial issue, not 3 days in a locked room. I returned to the house only to collect what I needed. I didn't look long at the room where I had been locked in. I had nothing left there, not a belonging, not a hope. For years, I had kept a small savings account in my own name. I added to it whenever I could. A few weeks later, I bought a small house in a nearby town. 1 bedroom, a small yard, and a door with a lock that only I have the key to. He never called, not once. I didn't call either. The hardest part was not that he locked the door. The hardest part was that he knew I was inside. He knew I couldn't get out, and he still left. And he didn't come back. When I broke that door frame and felt the first rush of cold air on my face, I didn't just walk out of a room. Something inside me ended that day. I didn't just leave a house. That was the day I lost my son. Have you ever been through something like this? A story that leaves a mark on you for life? I am deeply broken, but I keep moving forward. If you feel ready, share your story in the comments or reach out to Honest Stories Hotline and tell it there. Thank you to everyone who listens.